Hello, I'm Toycat and welcome back to my second channel video. This is Antigua and Barbuda. It is one of the smallest nations on Earth. It has fewer than 100,000 people living there, and fun fact, they are not a republic. They're planning a referendum on becoming one, however, because right now they have a king. That's right, a nation this small has a king, and that king just so happens to be the same as the UK monarch. And this is something that the Prime Minister, Gaston Brown, says that isn't a smart thing. In fact, he says that the final step to completing the Circle of Independence will ensure that they will become a truly sovereign nation, something they can only do after removing the king as the head of state. And it is pretty strange that the king of the UK is also king of all of these places around the world. There are 15 separate countries which are Commonwealth realms and therefore part of the same king/queen that I have. Indeed, look at the queen who's on my money. That is the same king/queen who was in charge of all of these places. Leave it 3 seconds. Okay, this is the actual queen. I just wanted to get some angry comments about how it's the wrong person. Do you want to see the queen on some other money here? Look at that. That is the queen who is head of state of all of these places, or was head of state of 33 places when she took charge in 1952. And when she died, she was head of just 15. I think this number will continue to go down during King Charles's reign, and I've got a lot of explanations as to why. Part of it is referendums that are planned, and part of it is all of the other things I wanted to talk about today, which will be fun to dive into. First things first though, this is an actual explanation of where the king is currently actually king. Ignore Barbados because I'm assuming this is outdated. They became a republic in 2021. Ignore Ireland because they're only on here because they share an island with Northern Ireland, a part of the United Kingdom, and therefore a place that has the king/queen as their head of state. But yeah, everywhere else on here is a country that has the king as their head of state. So obviously there's the countries that make up the UK. They're not really countries, we just call them countries. They're not sovereign in any way, but you know, it keeps people happy. So Scotland, England, Wales, Northern Ireland are all covered. Then we've got the Crown dependencies, which are independent countries in every way except for being actually a country. They run their own affairs, but they are technically part of the UK. Then there's the British Overseas Territories, which are a part of the UK, and all things are technically run by the UK, but they actually have some self-devolved things. So there's places like Montserrat and the British Virgin Islands. I don't know why we need to list this over here. We already listed Scotland, England, and Wales, am I right? There we go. Let's have some fun with this. So, yeah, as you can see, like, there's a lot of places around the world which currently have the king as their ruler, but the most strange ones are these purple ones because these are fully independent countries. They have their own parliaments, they have their own democracies, and yet they choose to have the king/queen as their head of state. Why would they do this? Well, first of all, it's kind of like an opt-out process, right? You have to remove the king/queen. You can become a fully independent country, and all of these countries were granted independence, and then it's like, oh yeah, by the way, you can keep the queen/king for as long as you like. It's kind of like, I don't know, when you sign up for something by accident and like you have to untick the email, you have to untick the box that says please email me. They didn't untick the box that said become a republic, and so yeah, particularly with India, which is where the process basically started, they didn't want to have the queen, and so we said, okay, we'll make a separate organization to the Commonwealth, which is the well-known got some hair in my mouth, I'm sorry, I'm basically a cat over here, but it's basically, they wanted to be a part of the Commonwealth as the organization, still be good friends with all these other ex-British colonies, which had this link, whether it's a good link or not being, tied to the UK in this way, but they wanted to be a part of the organization, but they didn't want to have the king of another land, the queen of another land, be their head of state, and so instead it was split into two bodies, the Commonwealth, which is a much larger organization, and the Commonwealth realms, which are places that all share the same head of state still, which are still arguably linked in that way, even though the head of state doesn't do anything. It's like a connection that ties Australia, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, Belize, and Canada all together via the UK. It's at least the most diplomatic version of things. And yeah, although there's some debate about whether the monarchy should continue in the UK, I think the most damning poll you can see is this one: will Prince Charles make a good king? Although ignoring the fact that sometimes more people than not think he would not make a good king, the fact that it's 50-50 as to whether a pretty politically neutral head of state that doesn't really do anything, how could you be a bad king? All you have to do is sit there and sign your bills. The fact that most, like half of Brits, or 35%, depending on how you want to count not sure people, think that Charles would not be a good king, is something we'll ignore for now and just say, if King Charles remains king of the UK, which of the countries are most likely to leave? So Antigua and Barbuda, they're planning a referendum. They seem pretty bullish on the idea of like get rid of the monarchy. Obviously Barbados, who is nearby, just did the same thing. king, and so like, well, you know, if they can do it, why can't we do it? That's obviously the place to start. Then the place that I say you go right afterwards is Australia. Australia in 1999 actually held a referendum. So Australia is like, if you actually look at the map right here, they're one of the two countries that make up the bulk of the land area of places that the king is in charge of, and they've always been a bit more skeptical of it than most other places. And indeed, the biggest arguments against it are basically saying, shouldn't an Australian be the head of state of Australia? Why is it a British person? Wait, let me just fact check this. Isn't this the UK? Isn't this Australia? We're very culturally close as countries. Genuinely, some of the best friends as far as countries can be. But isn't it a bit strange that like our head of state lives there when our country is here? Can someone check on a map? Like, okay, so Canberra to London. It can't be that far, right? Oh, it turns out it's about half the planet away. Sure is strange. And so they had a referendum, and 55% of people voted against removing the Queen. However, at the time, it was mostly seen as like even though people didn't think that a British, obviously in some places, particularly the dark black and red areas, people probably were voting saying, yeah, let's just keep the Queen, it's perfectly fine, and we love her so much or whatever. In most of the areas that were slightly, slightly ahead, areas that were maybe 50-50, it's like, well, do we want to have a presidential system? Do we want to have a whole thing like that? They weren't on board of the alternative system, because you did have to vote for that as well. And so if you actually look at polls happening since then, most people have been in support of a republic for most of the time. Interestingly enough, until Queen Elizabeth II died, at which point it takes a little bit of an upswing. But you can see that, like, for the most part, people think that Australia should be a republic. It's just people are divided on how it should be a republic. I mean, maybe the same thing in the UK, right? People think that the king isn't very good, but does that mean that they have an alternative? It actually does. If you look at this, there's a fun thing of like, who should succeed the king? Who should succeed as king? More people thought it should be Prince William over Prince Charles. So there is, but even then it's like, well, do people think there should be a king/queen at all? Is the monarchy good or bad for Britain? Apparently people say 54% good. Very strange, actually. But if you look into this some more, you can see like, okay, so the majority of Australians do favour leaving. You just need to come up with an idea that actually, connects people and makes people go, yeah, that is better than the Queen, rather than just saying, yeah, having a British king over Australia is kind of weird. But yeah, I think at some point, it's a guarantee that someone makes that happen. Who is that person going to be? Maybe not the current Prime Minister, maybe not the next Prime Minister, but all it takes is one referendum where you move 5% of people, and let's be honest, if you look at the population distribution, people in cities overwhelmingly voted yes to remove the Queen, and people in cities tend to, you know how that is, they'll reproduce more. They move out to the suburbs and, younger people. So overall, you'd expect demographic change would continue in that direction. Maybe you'd be wrong, but that's something you'd expect. Also, another referendum that was held was in 2009, Vincentian, so that's St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I have a really close connection to St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Like, I've never been there, and I can tell you very few things about them besides the time they were invaded by the US, but The thing I can tell you about this country is their domain, .vc, I used when I was a child, and it helped me out a lot. So thank you to the .vc domain. Thank you, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for that. But anyway, so I should have just said I had a close connection and left it at that. People would have been more confused. Anyway, so they voted to abolish the monarchy, and they also voted by a pretty similar margin, 43 to 56. In other words, about 10% in it, which people thought was pretty good turnout given the inclement weather. But yeah, basically, St. Vincent and the Grenadines are also on that point where they're very close to people wanting to become fully independent. They're just not really sure about, again, they got the question of like, well, what comes later? What comes afterwards? It is our assessment that to conjoin the power of a Prime Minister with the power of head of state, head of governments, that is a matter which will end up making the office holder more powerful than the current situation. Which is true. Technically, right now, having a separate head of state is good. Whether you can have a separate head of state which can perform the role like the king does without making it, political, without making it a power issue, is something that is a concern. Then we have, obviously, so these are the two countries which have held referendums. You could argue that makes them least likely to hold another one. They've already settled the question for a generation or so. Or you could argue that makes them most likely to go at it again. But there's also the Bahamas. So the Prime Minister of the Bahamas, Philip Brave Davis, that's a lame nickname. The nickname should be something like McDonald's lover, like I'm Philip McDonald's lover Davis. I didn't just see a McDonald's ad. Wait, is this a McDonald's weather forecast? Anyway, so the Tribune 242, which I have to assume is a local Bahamian newspaper. That's got to be that way, right? Anyway, so they report that they want to have discussions about it, and they want to make sure that the people decide what they should be. Basically saying, yeah, I mean, if there was to be a referendum, wouldn't be against it. He says while shaking hands with the future royal, you might say. Then we have the head of Jamaica saying basically the same thing, but more strongly worded. Jamaica has to become a republic. He thinks that obviously right now having the there's no question that Jamaica has to become a republic. Who is arguing that point? We have put together a plan to move forwards in a way that is meaningful and substantial in function and form. That's what we're going to do. Which is funny. He says we've put together a plan that is meaningful and substantial in form, and it's been a year and we've heard nothing from that, so clearly not very substantial. I'm starting to think that he's a politician and he just said something popular and didn't actually have a plan whatsoever. I'm starting to think that. Obviously, that can't be true. But yeah, it seems as though most of the Caribbean nations have the shared kind of feel of like, yeah, we have the king, we have the UK monarchy. Are we like down with that, or is that just there because? And they're all like, well, I guess we've got other things to focus on. I don't know, something hurricanes, right? But then yeah, so basically the overall direction seems to be that countries want to get rid of the king. In fact, if you look at this map, you'll notice how since the Commonwealth realm's creation in the 40s, you'll notice that countries have only ever left. Even though a country has joined the Commonwealth, which is still the strangest thing, I think it's Mozambique, right? It's a former Portuguese colony that was like, hey, we love that organization you have, can we join? And the Commonwealth was like, I guess we can't say no. And so there's a Portuguese colony in the former set of British colonies, just for fun there. But the question of joining the king is a question of insanity, right? I mean, keeping the monarchy as a tie to the past, yeah, no country is planning a monarchy. No American presidential candidate has said, hey, why don't we make president a non-elected position like a king that lasts forever? Anyone down with that? Also, we could remove this whole political thing. It would be insane, right? It'd be similarly insane if, like, Egypt's just over there thinking, actually, we've got to pick a non-British colony. Kyrgyzstan's just over there thinking, things are pretty unstable in the region right now. You know what would help? Having the king as our head of state. Let's send a letter. Let's see if we can get things done. It's the closest example you have is Papua New Guinea, which assumed that they wouldn't have the monarchy. They assumed they'd have a presidential system, but then most people favored it, and they're like, okay, I guess we'll have the king. We'll have the queen at the time. But in general, countries don't pick up the king; they drop the king. And so over time, you can expect that to happen. And I think that it will probably accelerate over the life of King Charles, partly because he's not the most popular guy. I mean, again, like maybe he becomes more popular as time goes on. That's when you start seeing him on the money, when you start there's a guy, when you start seeing King Charles on the money, like he is on this note right here. That's King Charles, trust me, that's a true fact. Let me know in the comments if you think that that's not true, but I'm pretty sure that's King Charles. This is my whole strategy on YouTube. It is drive engagement by infuriating people into leaving comments. Anyway, so obviously, when people see King Charles on the money and he's cutting scissors and doing stuff all day, maybe that changes people's minds. However, I do think there is also a bias against foreign rulers of like kings are okay. So if you think about the Queen, she was a nice old lady or whatever people assumed, and she's like this like old-timey quaint thing from across the sea. Like, oh, isn't it cute? The UK monarch's also head of Canada. But having a king is very different. I mean, if you look at the US, you can see this in a ton of examples. So, New York is just the easiest example for this. Do you know King's College? You know the place Hamilton got a scholarship to? You know what it's actually called? It's called Columbia University because in 1800, trying to remove this remnant of the king, they renamed it. King's College, as it was known until 1784, is now Columbia, which I think is a law school, maybe? I don't know, man. It's a bit of a strange name for a university. I know it's named after the district, or it's named after the name that people use to describe America, but whatever. It's still a strange name. It's the 5th oldest institution in the United States. Very interesting thing. But also, there is Kings County, right? Also known as Brooklyn. It was called Kings County. It was named after the king, but they didn't really like, calling it Kings County is just not as catchy as Brooklyn. Whereas, Queens County, just to the north of it, Kings and Queens, Queens still has its name. Queens is a quaint little thing. Obviously, that sounds like an entirely just like coincidental thing, but take a look at Australia. Kingsland and Queensland. Where is Kingsland? I don't see it. Whereas Queensland, wow, still alive. What about Victoria? I don't assume there was a province in Australia named after a king. I guess America still has Georgia, which is named after the same George that King's College was named after. But you get the point, right? There are it's much there is this weird system where a queen is a quaint thing from across the sea, and a king is this artificial, antiquated imposition on our sovereignty. And I think that is going to be a big factor that leads to a lot of these Caribbean nations, which are probably just in the Commonwealth realms by, for the most part, you know, like if you think about the fact that they are majoritarily, what's the polite way to use this? Like they are not natives of the land. They are people who are forcibly taken to those lands by people doing a little bit of slave trading, just a little bit of slave trading. But you know, like so these are colonies that aren't like, oh yeah, the king was so good for us. These are places where it's like, oh yeah, so we were enslaved and then moved here, and then we got independence, and for some reason, those people, you know, those darn white people over in that island are still in charge of us. Don't really like that so much. And so yeah, I do think it's basically an inevitability that almost all of the Caribbean nations eventually leave. The matter for Belize and Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and Papua New Guinea is basically a question of what matters more, having someone who actually represents you or having a system that has existed as old as time. And in the same way, I guess, you know, this is going a bit deep for a geography video. If you think about the property system that we use, right? So who owns this square of France right here? Bougies. You know, I'll pick New Zealand, actually. That might be more fun. Who owns this square of New Zealand right here? Is it the person who is most deserving of this square? Is it the person who could do the best with it? Let's see, Lockyer Road here. Or is it the person who owned the land whenever it was first sold, or bought it from the person who bought it from the person who bought it when it was first sold? You know, like we don't have a system where everything exists because we perfectly planned it that way a year ago. We have a system where, you know, like things have existed for a very long time and they just move slowly over that time. And so yeah, over time the king and the queen will change what they do. Maybe he'll talk about climate change, or he'll be on more notes, and he'll, you know, there's these very slight changes, but there's something about having a very old system which appeals to a lot of people in a way that I can't ever perfectly explain. But when you think about, I don't know, what do you like in a video game? Do you like the things that have been there this whole time? Or do you want to design this video game from scratch? If you think about the most successful MMOs, they always just copy another MMO and change things very slightly. Maybe that's what people like regards to the monarchy. You couldn't make a copy of it, it would be insane. And so you go with the existing system because, well, she's just a nice old lady. Maybe that's what's true. All I know is that having a queen is ridiculous because we're not bees. Why do we need a queen? This is from a demonstration in Canada. And you know, they got what they wanted in the end. We don't have a queen anymore. You're welcome, Ottawa. Doing our best over here. Anyway, thank you for elect the GG. Elect the GG. Just remember, you need to, if you feel like you're having a bad game, just elect to have a good one. Thank you for watching. Second show. Oh wait, give me money. I'll use it. Would you like me to have a stack of fat notes? A fat stack of notes with which to show off the queen in future videos? This is the queen right here, just a reminder. And this is definitely the king. If you want me to have a fat stack of money, then give it to me on Patreon. I will use the money to keep these videos of roughly the same quality they are right now. I have been accidentally hiring editors, so the next video you see will have a little bit of editing in there, but these videos will still exist thanks to your support monetarily, because I use money to buy things. I think it's pretty cool. They usually don't relate to this channel, I promise you. It's for dumb things like, you know, I want to go to this square in New Zealand. It was in Christchurch, right? What's the nearest thing you can spend? Oh, hello Vietnam. Ooh, we got two banh mi places next to each other. Do you want this Vietnamese or this Vietnamese? I need to get both Vietnamese foods on Riccarton Road. Oh, yeah, it looks cool on the outside too. You know, I'm jealous of the people who live in that house. They get to be walking distance from this stuff. You know, I'm jealous of these people. Speaking of people I'm jealous of, second channel, don't care. I have things to do now. Bye.